So welcome everyone to our weekly Lunch and Learn, hosted by the New Jersey Cannabis Association. I'm the association president, Ed DeVeaux. The New Jersey Cannabis Association is the state's first and largest trade association to help develop a responsible, sustainable, diverse, and profitable cannabis industry in New Jersey. During our Lunch and Learn, please feel free to network in the chat feature. Put in your web addresses, your email, ways to contact you, and we will get into this afternoon's conversation. When I became the president of the Cannabis Association, there was a press release issued, and the press release went national, and I was humbled by the number of media outlets, including 420 media outlets, cannabis media, that picked up on the story. And I was being advised about the number of hits that the story was getting. And the very first two phone calls I got, the first one came from my good friend and long-term colleague, Carlos Medina, who's the head of the statewide Hispanic Chamber of Commerce. Carlos was the first to recognize that I was in fact now his colleague heading up a Chamber of Commerce. And as you're all aware, I have been calling the New Jersey Cannabis Association the state's Cannabis Chamber of Commerce. The very next call I got was from Ben Gelt in Colorado. That was truly a moment that let me know just how critical and how important New Jersey was in this process, this national process. I again just, I'm amazed at what we've been doing, what we've been working on. And Ben Gelt is somebody who I can't thank enough for his support and guidance over the last, going on 6-7 months now. And so Ben, welcome to New Jersey via Zoom, and please do introduce yourself, good friend Ben Gelt.
Ed, thank you so much. I didn't know at the time that I was the second guy or second person to call you, so it makes me feel, boy, I'm fast. You know, New Jersey is such a critical market, and when I saw that story and I looked into who Ed is and the background of the organization, it was a natural instinct for me, the son of two politicians, to reach out to this man and introduce myself. And so I'm Ben Gelt. I'm, among other things, founder and co-chair of the Cannabis Certification Council. We're a national nonprofit focused on educating both the industry and consumers about sustainable and quality practices. You can learn more about the organization at cannabiscert.org or cannabissustainability.org. We do events, we do education, we put out reports and best practices guides, all kinds of great stuff. I've also been in the industry as an entrepreneur and as a consultant for over a decade now. I've participated in a lot of regulatory work here in Colorado and increasingly around the country. So I think we're going to talk today about early stage regulation and lessons learned and where states like New Jersey might look for lessons and places where they can jump ahead of us even. So really thrilled to be here, and always a pleasure to talk with Ed. So excited to do it on camera.
Wow, thank you so much, Ben. So look, I mean, you tapped on the very first thing I want to share with our participants. Look, we are just getting started. We really are in infancy, right? The governor just signed the legislation back in February. Cannabis Regulatory Commission hit the ground in the following weeks. People are anxious. People want to see an industry. You've been there. Please just share, because I can say it, but coming from you, your experience in Colorado, it's not overnight, right? How do you get there?
A lot of meetings, a lot of disagreements, a lot of compromise, a lot of people spending a lot of time and money. There has to be a huge appetite for risk, which I suspect in this audience there is. And you just have to have a somewhat just unnerving belief that it's going to come to fruition. In Colorado, there was a lot of pressure that came from the industry onto the state to get things out the door. There were folks inside the state, institutional interests and others that wanted a slower launch of the market. There were people that were talking about all sorts of different elements within the market that they thought should get greater consideration prior to launch. But ultimately, part of what we did here in Colorado when we passed the ballot initiative is it tied a launch date into the language. So we were somewhat tied to that. Of course, we all know that those kinds of dates can come and go without things happening, and people can make exceptions. But in our case, it did. And we've really been fixing and adjusting and working on it endlessly ever since. So it's just an ongoing, endless process.
So I appreciate that, because again, it's balancing expectation and realization, right? It's no easy task. And as I've shared, both in public statement and in media interviews, look, our Cannabis Regulatory Commission has the task of not only creating regulation, they have an agency to create. They've got jobs to fill. They've got positions where they've essentially got to create an agency. So hiring, creating, I guess the personnel guidelines, all of that has to be done at the same time. So I do sympathize with our regulatory commission, but then that's why we exist, right? And that's to help give them cover, right? Is that being fair? On some level, right? We hold them accountable, but yet we have to give them cover.
I think that's right. And, some of that cover is by providing solid examples of what's workable and coming to the table prepared to compromise, knowing what you need versus what you want, right? It's always an important distinction. And, again, I think that's why someone like yourself, Ed, is so valuable to your membership, because someone like me, I can come in and talk about certainly Colorado. We can look around the country and I can talk about all sorts of various elements of policy, whether it's testing or energy or waste or, any number of things. The reality is always different in any market on the ground because of the local politics. All politics are local, as you know well. And you need someone like yourself who has a deep understanding of that universe and how it functions every day, regardless of cannabis, and then being able to pull the cannabis thread through. And like I said, I think a core part of that is having your patrons, the industry stakeholders, be present. I'm a big believer in, persistence. There's a great proverb that I love that, to sum it up, pound the rock. If you want that stone to break, you got to keep pounding it. And, it takes that persistence and investment on your side. And to your point, that is cover, because when you come to the table that way with ideas, with things that can work, knowing what the other side wants, that's how you can move the ball forward.
So when you were pounding the rock, what were some of those things that you prioritized or helped your regulatory body prioritize?
When I first started, I'll rephrase. When we went from medical to adult use, I began working with the University of Colorado toxicology lab, doing their public affairs. And so we had a fairly narrow focus on quality. We talked a lot about testing, pesticides, and the like. And frankly, we at the university lost those arguments. The things that we were pushing for in terms of creating quality assurance, quality control, did not come to fruition in that time, starting in 2013, 14, 15. Fast forward to 2018, Colorado made a significant advancement and their testing protocols and quality assurance, quality control moving forward. Now we continue to refine, and it's gotten much better, but it has taken that decade plus of work to go from really a point specific with testing and all that, where there was very minimal work going on, to a point now where there's a more meaningful regimen for quality control. Another area, Ed, that I think is worth pointing out that I think for operators is probably more exciting, because testing gets into, you can touch on some third rail issues very quickly there. Where I see huge opportunities for states like New Jersey are around sustainability issues, around how waste is managed, around how we look at the energy and carbon footprint of the industry, and how we work to incentivize the industry through existing structures that states have to make the waste management really efficient, and not just have all of this stuff go to landfill unnecessarily, to allow for composting and other things that can really create more circular economy. They can cut costs for operators, they can boost profit. I mean, really meaningful stuff, just by not forcing, for example, with organic waste, in many states, it's common for all of the waste coming out of a cultivation to be blended and rendered unrecognizable, which forces it to be sent to landfill. All of that same waste, there's no commercial value in it. That's well established in any market you look at. There's no commercial value in the stocks and the stuff that they throw out, unless you compost it and do things like, anaerobic digestion and gasification and these other things, where you can then reuse it, or in the case of anaerobic digestion, you can actually turn it into natural gas and enter it into the energy stream. So these create really significant downstream economic opportunity, but can be constrained if we just do something as simple as require it to be rendered unrecognizable. So these are areas where I think a state like New Jersey really has an opportunity to help the industry proliferate faster and more sustainably.
That's brilliant stuff, because prior to the beginning of the today's session, you used the phrase that how we love regulation, right?
Oh, in the Northeast, yeah.
Right. Well, that's one thing that we do very well, right? That's create regs, and so when you look at that, you're absolutely right. And part of our job as the association is not just to represent the license holders, the people who touch the plant, but it's all of the ancillary stuff, and that's where I think I admire a ton what you've done with respect to your sustainability efforts. It's almost like you created yet another emerging economy when you look at sustainability and recycling and responsible development. Your thoughts on some of that.
Well, I don't think I've created anything. I think we're promoting it, and
okay.
I think one of the things that you and I have talked about, Edmund, a few times is the opportunity in the ancillary services for, say, equity participants and more meaningful community engagement. There are all these opportunities surrounding the industry that don't require the same level of licensure or background checks or even CapEx to enter. And those are meaningful places for smaller businesses, equity participants, people that have been disproportionately harmed by the war on drugs, to enter and benefit from the cannabis industry. In terms of the sustainable policy and things like that, like I said, the rules around the organic waste in Colorado, we only changed those rules to allow for composting and all of that last summer. So, we've been banging on that drum for about 7 years, and finally, as of January 1st this year, it was allowed. And now one of the things that we're finding, Ed, is that because we required so much paperwork around it, that it's actually there's still this delta for many operators to actually engage in these new practices. So we're still refining now with the state. So, it's just an ongoing process. And again, I think the thing that we can do the most in these emerging markets is work to have cannabis be treated as similarly to other industry as possible. And particularly at these points where they're going to inevitably intersect with other industry, waste is such an easy example to continue to point to. The waste stream coming out of these facilities, particularly if all the like organic waste is mixed with plastic and rendered unrecognizable, it's going to a landfill right next to all the other landfill garbage. So states get ahead of that and say, we want that same waste to go to compost. We want that same waste to go to anaerobic digestion. We want this waste to go to streams that have better upsides than just landfill. You just have to get in front of it and not treat it like the redheaded stepchild. So yeah, that's a big opportunity, I think.
That's excellent. So, I'm going to switch gears a little bit. So before I switch gears, I usually at the beginning recognize our Lunch and Learn sponsors. So I was so excited to get to hear from you. I postponed that mission. So right now I just want to pause before we switch gears and thank our Lunch and Learn sponsors for today. Burton, Trent Public Affairs, the law firm of Inglesino, Webster, Wyciskala, and Taylor, Puffin, Entrepreneurs and Investors, HBK, CPAs, Argus 365 Security, Eaze, who actually was our guest not too long ago, the UFCW, and Garden State Greenhouse. I want to thank them all for supporting our Lunch and Learn and supporting the New Jersey CannaBusiness Association. Switching gears now a little bit, one of the things that Colorado experienced, and we always in New Jersey, we talk about what happened in Colorado when municipalities opted out. And when you first started, and then when one municipality or those who opted out saw the money, the revenue that was generated, they were clamoring to get back in. And so New Jersey is kind of facing that opt-in, opt-out scenario. They still have some time. There's been legislation introduced. I want to give kudos to Assemblyman Tully out of Bergen County that he introduced legislation to extend the opt-in, opt-out date. Also, so when it comes to that, what was your experience with the notion of opting in, opting out? The feel, if you could share, if you had any sense of either remorse or of gee, glad we opted out. What happened in Colorado with that?
I think in the beginning, the jurisdictions that did that were fine with it because they felt very clearly they didn't want it in their communities and all this and that. Most communities have now switched. There have been entire counties that initially opted out that have now opted in. You still have some holdouts, most notably Colorado Springs here, which is I think the second or third largest city in the state, still does not allow for adult use. The medical there has proliferated. And of course, in the town next door, there's like 10 dispensaries. I'm fine with communities opting out, frankly. I think it's a mistake. I think, you can also look in California where in the early days of adult use, you had something like 75% of municipalities opting out. Think about that. So only 1 in 4, and of course you had some really large municipalities opting in California, and there's a lot of land, a lot of places in California, so there's just volume and not necessarily real population. But even there, you've seen that those communities have largely said, what are we doing? We're sending taxes and revenue and business next door, or in most cases, they're sending it literally from their own communities into the next community. So to me, I think that it's a fine mechanism to create political cover for states to allow municipalities and other jurisdictions to opt out. And I think it's an incredibly short-sighted decision for most jurisdictions, and it's one that, I think broadly, Edwin, it's increasingly untenable to be an elected official in the United States of America and be stridently anti-cannabis. You can hedge. There was an interesting article a few weeks ago, probably in Politico, about the Mormon church and the blueprint that they've created in Utah that other red states are following to go down the path of medical. It's a very limited regime, and it's inevitable. I hear it from my neighbors in Utah on the occasion that I talk to some of them. There's just not enough market there to meet the demand. And whatever the Mormon church model is not robust enough. And yeah, so let them opt out is what I would say. If I'm the mayor of a town and my neighbor opts out, I'm thinking that's that much more money for us. So good for us.
Right. That's cool. So, and it's funny on that, one of my colleagues, our vice president, Dr. Marianne Bays, she's here. I saw her in the participant feature. She and I had an interesting experience on Wednesday. We went to a town hall that was hosted by a group that was, what's the phrase they used, that they were anti-addiction. And so this anti-addiction group is hosting a town hall, and I asked to be a speaker, just from a policy standpoint, because I think it's important to understand how we got here to begin with, right? 90 years ago, the government, the powers that be, decided not for public health reasons, not for public safety reasons, but for reasons of race and class to criminalize cannabis. And so if you refuse to see that, I think you're missing out on why this has become such a volatile subject to begin with. So the short version of it is, and Dr. Bays and I can share with others later. The short version was, well, Ed, thank you for your interest. We'll let you know if you can speak. Sounds good so far. To be followed 5 minutes later by an email saying, no thanks, we don't want you to speak. And so I saw in the chat feature, somebody asked the question, what can the community, and I'm assuming they mean cannabis community, do? Especially when we're looking at, if you're a community and you're thinking about opting out, but then you let an anti-addiction group kind of lead the conversation. How did your community coalesce around this is the right thing to do?
It's a challenging question, Ed. The reality is that the anti-cannabis people, which in Colorado takes shape in the form of a group called Smart Colorado, still play heavily. And in fact, yesterday, the governor signed a potency cap bill that will impact medical cannabis and impact some of what's available in terms of potency and volume. So, and that was heavily driven by some of those same folks. And the tact has really changed to now focus on this anti-addiction, and also youth prevention kind of mode. And I think, it's, and I'll get to your question. I mean, I think the change in tact is a little bit scary because it's showing to have some traction. And I say scary because I think a lot of it is still rooted in the prohibitionist point of view, which is obviously antithetical to everything that we're doing. And so when the other side sort of has this zero-sum ultimate point of view, it can be very difficult to have any kind of nuance in the conversation. To speak to your question directly, what can community do? It's a little bit of the same song, Ed. They can engage. The thing, and this is what I was taught as a kid about politics, everybody at the civic table is welcome. That is the definition. So the trick is to pull up a chair. And so if cannabis companies want to be in this conversation, they have to be present first above everything. Second, they can demonstrate, I think, that they're going to be good actors. And that can take many, many forms. To me, some of that as a priority, I think should be vocally and visibly advocating for best practices as part of policy and saying things in community meetings about how they want to manage resources, how they want to be a carbon positive contributor, how they want to be a forward-looking industry. I mean, it's important to bang the drums. And then I think, going beyond that, we see this all over the country, and it's really heartening to me. I see so many different cannabis companies engaging directly in communities with vocational fairs and other kind of job opportunities and trainings, with being portals to education and creating partnerships with community colleges and other schools and the like. There's so many things. Plant trees, pay your employees better, hire from the community that you're in. There's an endless list of things that any company, doesn't matter what industry, any company can and should do this stuff. Cannabis companies in particular, I think, can realize a higher return and value from these things because we're under the microscope anyway, because everybody's looking anyway. So it's like, okay, you want to look at us all the time and treat us like we're crazy? You think it's crazy to like help kids and plant trees and advocate for good policy? Then we're going to be crazy over here, So there's nothing to it but to just show up and really, push for the right stuff and do it visibly and vocally.
That is such a brilliant way of looking at things. Just because you're in the cannabis industry does not mean that you're not part of the economy, right?
You're part of everything, man.
You're part of everything.
And I'm sorry, were people not smoking weed in New Jersey last year? Like, did I miss something? That's part of what is, I think it's probably unsaid too much amongst us in the industry. This is not something new. Like, grandma didn't just learn about marijuana this year. Like, she knew about it. She knew about it 40 years ago. Now, what she thinks about it, maybe that is stuff that we need to continue to evolve and educate grandma on, but we can do that too. We have those resources. We have doctors, we have scientists, we have very thoughtful, brilliant people in this industry, and they are part of the economy and they're part of community. And one of my favorite little factoids these days, Ed, the data shows that the biggest economic contribution from the industry is not in the tax revenue. It's actually in the activity. It's in the workers going to and from work and using transit, using the roads, paying for gas, being out in the community. That is actually what is showing to be the biggest economic effect in all of the states, California, Colorado, Oregon, Washington. It's the general activity that is causing the most stimulus. And then you have this benefit of what states and municipalities and counties and any jurisdiction should look at as found money. Because even though people were smoking weed in New Jersey last year and 5 years ago and 10 years ago, there were no taxes being collected. So now we got that going too. So it's really, it's just a matter of being present and being proud.
Man, thank you so much for sharing that. A lot of people forget that, when, especially in my conversations about, well, what do you think about Connecticut? What do you think about New York? Like, we have always been a regional economy to begin with. So how goes New York, goes New Jersey and Pennsylvania and Connecticut. How goes New Jersey, goes New York, Pennsylvania, Connecticut, right? So economy is so interlaced, not only geographically, but from the specialties as well. And so I love that point that you made, because and I do want to touch on this because I did see in the chat, and it always is a conversation here, that the notion that getting everyone engaged, you don't have to just touch the plant. That there's ways, there's opportunities by being a janitorial service, by being a security firm, by being a transportation outfit. So all of these things are going to play into this industry. And so dare I say, and maybe maybe you don't, that if you are a person of color, touching the plant is not the only avenue. That we really do have to look at ancillary businesses, and whether you touch the plant or not, we do have to engage in lessons of financial acumen or financial literacy, business acumen. Just prior to our call, I was on a Zoom call with our partners at Stockton University. And I know Stockton is here in the participation column, but this really is about making the economy accessible to everyone.
It's totally true. It's about opening it up. And again, I think, and I saw some of the comments in the chat too. As you're saying, there are all these businesses that service the industry. So, you can talk about direct services, you can talk about products that get sold into the industry. This industry requires a lot of stuff, right? Whether it's lights or fertigation or HVAC, waste, like all of this stuff, it all requires vendors and expertise. And a lot of those businesses have jobs that have low barriers to entry. So there's all kinds of opportunity out there. And again, I think in new states that are opening up now, where we know that there's an impetus to address these things, it's just a matter of being thoughtful and creating requirements or creating structures that allows these things to really happen and not just funnel the business to the same old people and get into the same systems.
That's right. So Ben, as we get ready to wrap up our conversation, and before I thank you, I just again want to thank our Lunch and Learn sponsors. That's Burton, Trent Public Affairs, the law firm of Inglesino, Webster, Wyciskala, and Taylor, Puffin, Entrepreneurs and Investors, HBK, the CPAs, Argus 365 Security, Eaze, the UFCW, United Food and Commercial Workers, and Garden State Greenhouse. I want to thank you all for your sponsorship and support. And Ben, my final thanks to you, and as you are definitely allowed to close with some final remarks, again, I want to thank you for your early leadership, your early friendship. Man, again, the way you reached out to me was, humbled by the fact that you took a look across the country and saw value in what we were doing. So Ben, thank you. Any last thoughts, comments?
Ed, I'm humbled because you're in a position where a lot of people are reaching out to you, and I really admire how open you are and transparent and thoughtful. And I appreciate how quickly you saw our mission and thought, yes, this is something I want to engage with. So thank you. Closing thoughts, I'll just emphasize again, I think that there are many policy areas where New Jersey can get ahead on sustainability and do it in a way that still allows for the high regulatory touch kind of instinct to play out, be yourselves in New Jersey. But I think around areas with waste, with lighting and energy, with water, with even HR and how communities engage, there are great ways for this state to perform better than others. Leafly just put out a report, which you can question all of it, but they put out a report that showed that Colorado was the #1 state in the country with social equity. We have a long ways to go here. And so I can tell you, some of these things that I'm talking about now, if they're addressed early in New Jersey, that's how you're going to skip way ahead on that list, because it's taken us over a decade to get, I think, not very far here. So really thrilled to engage and look forward to working with all of you moving forward on these kinds of issues and bringing more education and content for New Jersey operators to learn about best sustainable practices. So thank you, Ed, really so much, man.
And don't drive high, don't drive drunk. Thank our sponsors once again. There will be ways of finding them. Please do consider membership in the New Jersey CannaBusiness Association. Your membership is what makes this happen. Ben, again, look, this isn't the last time.
Yeah, man, we'll be back. And if you're not members with Ed, what are you doing? Send man a check. There's nobody better in New Jersey. I've looked around. It's not like I called Ed because I was like, let's cast all the stones at New Jersey. It was like, this is the guy. Because I looked at the other orgs, and this is the one that's active and doing the most. So if you're in this state and you're serious about being engaged in regulatory process and policy, you need to work with Ed DeVeaux. Happy to do that all day long.